afternoon and welcome to session 5. So same format as session 4B, demos only. You watch, you replicate at home. Anything that breaks, come back to me by email and we will look at it next week. Before we get into the substance, I just want to do a little bit of a check. The session 4B retrospective surfaced something that I just want to address. We're now 5 weeks into the course, and I think last week Roger said, what's the repo? I think Alison commented this morning, this is Greek to me. So I think that's a bit of my fault. Maybe I've been using some vocabulary, which maybe I haven't been kind of introducing it in quite the right way. So I'm just going to run through a couple of terms now, and I just want to get a feel for if people are maybe confident explaining that to somebody else who hasn't done this course, and then I'll check whether people's vocab is at the right place. So everyone comfortable with a repo and what a repository is? Some nods. How about a vault? Okay, good. Some nods. A skill. I'm seeing some nods.
Not from me. Skill.
Session 4B went into that at the very, very end. And think of it as a recipe of steps. And every time you find yourself having to repeat the same thing to your agent, you should put that into a skill because it then knows all of the steps or the recipe to complete that. Okay, markdown file. I'm hoping everyone's got that one. How about commit?
No.
Yeah. If you recall, GitHub is our versioning system. And every time you commit a new version to your versioning system. You don't need to know how to do it. You just need to know the term commit. Your agent will know all of the syntax to do that for you. But you need to understand when I commit, I'm updating my versioning system on my computer. How about push? If I say a push to GitHub. So that's almost the next step, which is once I've committed on my local versioning system, I push to GitHub, which is my cloud versioning system. And so that's the word push. Is there any other terminology that people have come across that I haven't explained particularly well? At least it'll trigger me to include it in an email after the event.
I'm a little confused about the difference between commit and push. And also I have concern about throwing this stuff at GitHub without the correct command so that it doesn't end up public information, because GitHub is sending a lot of marketing emails about, put your new code on here so everyone can see it.
Let me clarify your first point. Commit is just to your local file system. So there's a versioning which is happening on your local file system. So when you say commit, you're basically committing to your local versioning system, which is on your local computer. And when you say push to GitHub, it's doing the same process, but on your cloud version. And now to address your second point, I specifically said, if you're going to create a GitHub repo, you can make that a private repository. And if it's a private repository, it's not going to go out to the rest of the world. It's going to be in something which is purely within your control and will not be published externally unless you explicitly give it a key in order for somebody else to be able to read that.
In the setup that we have now, does it automatically commit something periodically to GitHub, or we need actively say?
So actively say it will ask you if it wants to push it to GitHub, because you might ask it, but if it sees that you're doing that on a regular basis, it will see that as a pattern and it would then start suggesting, okay, do you want me to push this to GitHub? It will only have a GitHub repo if you have asked it to set up a GitHub repo. And that's what I asked in the homework at the end of session 4B. Now, I know that's a little bit complicated, so maybe not everybody has managed to get that done, but that's fine. Email me, and if you haven't managed to get it done, if you're having some problems, and we'll follow up with that offline. That was just a quick vocab check for those that are only going to be following on the recording. Same as last week, you're not behind. We're not building live in the session, so replicate at your own pace and email me if there's any problems.
Sorry, Gavin, a question from me.
Yes.
Repository versus vault. Is this mainly, because the way I see a vault is it's something that exists in Obsidian and a repository is something that exists in GitHub. Is that right?
Yeah, so repository is in GitHub and your vault is your Obsidian vault, correct? Which is basically your folder on your computer, which has got markdown files in it. I need to share my screen. Today is phase 2 So phase 1, remember, was the foundational phase where we just got the basic agent working. Today's phase 2, and your agent gets new capabilities. Number 1, it remembers what happened. Every session you have leaves a deterministic trail in your vault, and the agent can read that back later. Number 2, it improves its own identity using what I call the master prompt command. Using this command, the agent reviews any recent sessions, proposes concrete updates to your soul, your user, your goals, your memory, your Claude files. You approve the changes and it gets updated to those files automatically. So your agent doesn't go stale and it evolves with how you're actually working on a day-to-day basis. So that's the purpose of today's session. The agenda items, we've just done our open and vocab check. We're going to open up with a bunch of questions that people have either sent me or have come up during conversations. I thought it best to have a chunk of today's session dedicated to that so we clarify some of those questions. Then we're just going to make sure that everybody's on the same page in terms of the check-in, and then we're going to do the main meat of the session, which is why memory matters, first of all. Then we're going to look at the hooks, which is the way in which we're going to give your agent memory, and we're going to look at how this is being done in our agent in practice. And then going to look at the what I call the curated layer, which is this MEMORY.md file, and then that's the memory piece. And then we're going to look at the master prompt, which is that self-improvement loop, which is going to be the main headline for today. Before the wrap up, I'm going to do the merge, which is basically looking at how we can bring in these hooks to enhance your agent from my GitHub repo, because I've obviously got it all set up on my GitHub repo, and I want you to merge the GitHub repo that I have with this additional functionality into your repo. So we're going to do that, and then we'll just wrap up with the homework and the close. I said I was going to come to some questions, and I've got a few questions via email and from people who I was speaking to during the course of the week. The first one was, as you open your Claude session, and it opens up with something called /init, I-N-I-T, and you're wondering what that is. That's because you are opening your Claude in the wrong folder. You're not opening it in your agent folder. Some people weren't necessarily going into their agent folder first. And if you open up Claude in a brand new folder, it suggests this init command, which is for initialize. And what that does is if you run that command, Claude then looks at everything in that folder to try and familiarize itself with that folder, and it creates a Claude.md file, which you'll already know is loaded into context the next time you open into that folder. So Claude already knows what's in that folder. But of course, if you open your agent into your agent folder, we had already created a Claude.md file. And so it doesn't show that init command. The next item is mobile and remote access. This was the most asked question of the week. Liesl asked it during session 4B. She said, if I'm out and about, what happens? Richard, you also said, can the work I'm doing also be done on my iPhone or iPad? I thought it's something I wanted to do while I was out but couldn't do it, and wondered if that's possible. During session 4B, I did respond to Liesel's question, and I gave an answer saying teleport, and that's not quite correct. Teleport is a command, but I got it a little bit mixed up, so I just want to clarify, and the correct terminology is remote control. I'm going to show that now, and I'm going to open a new shell, CD projects, CD Bob. I'm going to open Claude. And so now I've got this Claude session open. Create a task for Scratch to document AI training vocabulary. I've created a task. Before I do that, I'm going to open one other thing. Can people see my iPhone screen?
Yeah.
I'm going to go into my Claude app, and I'm in code, and there's no sessions found. So now I'm on my Bob agent, and he's created a task for me. I now do /remote-control. Remote control is active. So this is now running on my computer. I now come back to my phone, and you'll see now this session is available. Okay, that's great. And did you notice that this is now updating on my local computer? This is how you can then start something on your computer, remote control it, and then pick it up on your iPhone and carry on with that task in your iPhone. But actually teleport Claude does the opposite. If you start a session on Claude.ai on the web, you can teleport that session and pick that session back up on your agent when you get back to your computer. A couple of questions.
Is that going on Claude Cowork on your phone?
No, it's going on to Claude Code on my phone.
Can you only link one session at a time? So if I was out and about and I hadn't connected a specific session to Claude Code on my phone, would I be able to do anything?
No, because there will be no sessions active on Claude Code. I use something different. If I come back here to my iPhone, I open Telegram. Here is how I communicate with my agent when I'm out and about. I mentioned to you, he gives me an accountability check to make sure that I'm focusing on the right thing. So it was checking, are you focusing on the right thing? I responded, my focus for this morning is on the AI session prep. And he said solid focus. So I'm focusing on the right thing.
It's just a quick one. So if you're busy on your Claude Code on your phone and you want to come back to your computer now, do you then have to say teleport back, or is it automatically on your computer?
It's already automatically on your computer.
Okay.
Marius.
Me and Liesl, we share a Claude Code account. So if we use Claude, is it linked to the account or is it linked to a session?
It's linked to the account, but you can have multiple sessions remote controlled. So you can have a session remote controlled and Liesl can have one remote controlled, and you can both use your independent sessions.
Will you send instructions on how to do it the other way?
The Telegram approach?
Telegram, yes, sorry.
We will pick that up because session 6 is all about connectors. We'll pick that up then. There's a question about security and permissions. On the question of security, yes, there is a risk that you are using Claude Code, and Claude Code is obviously accessing the web. The way you're using it right now is probably slightly lower risk because you might be just doing web search stuff, updating markdown files on your computer. Claude has got a lot of built-in controls to look for this risk of prompt injection in case somebody in the web is putting something into their website to try and access your computer. Claude has got very good controls around that. I would say it's still a risk, but it's a lower risk. Once you start building things, then obviously there's a slightly higher risk because then you're starting to download packages from the internet. In that case, I would say ask your agent, what package is this? Can I trust it? Number 3, there's a file called settings.json, and that's your safety rail. Don't worry about that file. Don't worry about where it is, and don't worry about trying to update it yourself. Just ask your agent to look at the settings.json file and what permissions have been granted. And if you really want to be conservative, make sure that that settings.json file is locked down to maybe specific directories that you only wanted to access. The third one was this issue with bun versus Python hooks. If people are still getting an error saying bun not installed when you start your Claude Code session, in session 4B, I included the prompt that you should use with your agent to say that the TypeScript hooks need bun, which I don't have installed. Please update the Claude settings to use the Python variants, and your agent will know how to configure those hooks automatically. The next theme was around connectors. Richard, you had a question about using Google Keep. You weren't able to access Google Keep in the same way as you did your calendar and your email. Google Keep is just another connector, and next week in session 6 we will pick up on connectors, and hopefully we will get you to a position where you can connect to Google Keep and you can use that as a way to connect and update your to-do list, which I know you keep on Google Keep. The last thing, Richard, you asked, can you build a Gavin agent that has all the course contents so I can ask it questions without scrolling through emails? That's a great idea. I'm going to give that to my agent and tell him to build it. So then you can connect to that and you can ask questions, and all of the transcripts, because of course I recorded these in Granola, will be available, and your agent will be able to go back through the sessions and you'll be able to ask it from previous sessions. Just a quick check-in where people are. The way I want you to be set up right now, hopefully you have all of the required software installed on your computer. That's Git, it's Node, it's Python, and it's Claude Code itself. You've got your identity files filled in with the right substance, and that's in Markdown format, not in Word format. You've opened Claude Code in the terminal and you've said hi to your agent. You've defined your organizational structure. Also, hopefully told your agent that this is your organizational setup and is updated your Claude.md file and built some skill. Last point is you actually set up your own private GitHub repo, and you've managed to push your agent repo to your private GitHub repo. That's where I'm hoping people are. If you haven't set up your own GitHub repo, we've got this merge session later on in section 5.7 today. You need to have set up your private repo before you do the merge commands that we're doing later on. The main meat of today is about memory. So why is memory important and why does memory matter? I call this the chatbot Groundhog Day, because without active memory, every session starts from zero. You re-explain context, you reshare decisions, you have to reframe all your priorities, and it's exhausting and it does not compound. Whereas with memory, your agent picks up where you left off, it references past work, it notices patterns, and you stop being your agent's onboarding manager. Before we go any further, I'm going to prove that to you. I am going to come now to Bob. We had this Bob session open, and I'm going to give it a prompt. So I've said to him, what do you remember from our conversations last week? Answer just from what's loaded in your context right now. Don't read files, don't run Git, don't look anywhere. Just tell me what you actually have. Here it is. Honest answer, I have no memory of our conversations from last week. I don't carry conversation history across sessions. Each session starts afresh, so I can't tell you what was actually discussed. That is the major point for today's session, because we want our agent to remember things. After today, our agent will have memory and will start remembering across those sessions. This is now the phase 2 piece. We have this memory and there's going to be 2 particular pieces to it. But first, I'm going to pick up on something from a guy called Cole Medden, who's a YouTuber who I watch his channels quite a lot. And he writes about these memory consolidation patterns for agents. And he says that there's 5 steps, which you can see on this slide here. During session, everything that's in your current context window, and of course, that is memory, but it just happens to be memory within the current context window. And as you go through different conversations, of course, your agent is definitely going to remember that because that's all within the current context window. Your next one is this step 2. That is this at compact. And that is before there's a compaction, we're going to create a hook which tries to remember what happens before compaction. Can people remember what that compaction is?
It's when you have used up a lot of your context window tokens. Am I saying that right?
You're saying it absolutely correctly. As you start filling up your context window, it will get to the point where it's full up. At that point, your agent will summarize everything that's happened. That frees up space in your context window. So what we're going to do is we are going to create a hook that captures all the rich detail that happens before this compact happens. And that's really important because we don't want a summarized version in our memory. We want all the rich detail. The next one is number 3, where it's at session end. And that's where you finished a session and you exit. We want to make sure that when that exit happens, there is a hook which captures everything that happened during that session. The 4th item is the next morning, where you go back and you look and you reflect on all of the sessions that happens. Over a number of sessions, there might be certain learnings, there's certain decisions that get taken. We won't have that in today's one, and we'll pick that up in phase 3. My agent has this special addition, which is called distill, and it's a special command that runs across my sessions, and it distills all of the sessions into very important decisions that got taken and other important things, does a summary and anything that is learnt, and it creates a summary version of that. We're going to be doing a special command which will do the same type of thing but just over a number of sessions, and that's this number 5, what I call the master prompt command. And the master prompt command will go back over your last few sessions, all the detail, and it'll do roughly the same sort of thing. So you'll have a version of that, but just not an automated version. It's going to be a version which you're going to run manually for now. Today we're going to do 2 and 3, and we're going to do it via hooks, and then we're going to wire up this master prompt / command today. Hooks. What are hooks? Covered hooks already. So I'm going to ask the question out to the audience. Can anyone tell me what a hook is?
It's like a subroutine that you just kick off at certain times or based on certain triggers?
Correct. That's great. So if you remember, we've got this agent loop, and there's different points in that agent loop. The starting point is a session start. When you start your agent, you go CD project, CD Bob, or whatever you call your agent, and you type Claude. The moment you type Claude, it opens a new Claude session, and that is a session start in your agent loop. We've already got one hook in our current agent, and you'll recall this because it's a session start hook. When you start a session, it loads all of your identity files into the context window, so your agent knows who you are. And today we're going to expand that with 2 more hooks, and those are going to be to add the memory. Hooks are not calls to the LLM. Hooks are very deterministic. They are code. I'm going to open up the AI Training Starter. This is the repo which you've all got already, the AI Training Starter, and I'm in this folder called .claude, and I'm in the hooks subfolder. These are the hooks which are going to be installed on your new version of your agent. I'm in the phase 2 branch, which is the one that we're going to merge later, and we've got the SessionEndSummary hook, and we've got the PreCompactFlush hook, and there's a .ts, which is the TypeScript version, and there's a .py, which is the Python version. So there's 2 versions depending on whether you're running TypeScript code or whether you're running Python code, and I think most of you are running Python code, but this is just code. So it's not actually a call to the large language model, because what's happened is the large language model has stored all of the session history in a file on your computer. And what this code does is it's very simple. It's actually only 69 lines of code. What it's doing is it's going into your computer. It's looking for the JSON file on your computer, which is where Claude stores this information. It's reading it, and then it's looking for a place in your vault where it needs to store it, and then it's storing it on your vault in a particular directory. That's all it's doing. So very deterministic, no large language model involved, doing it at the session end. So when you type exit, and it's running this code, and that code is going to a place on your computer where Claude has stored those transcripts. It's reading the transcripts, and then it's creating a version in a markdown file on your computer. The reason why I'm showing you this code is because I just want to tell you that it's very, very simple, and it's very deterministic, and I wanted to explain in plain English what this code is doing so that you understand conceptually that these hooks, there's a PreCompactFlush hook and there's a SessionEndSummary hook, and if something happens and your agent says there's an error on the hook, you can at least understand conceptually what's going on so that you can talk to your agent and say, I have a Python version of these hooks. Can you make sure that it's configured correctly? So at least you understand conceptually enough to be able to have a conversation with your agent. And your agent, of course, is the one that knows how to understand the code and therefore how to fix it. I don't want your agent to become a complete black box to you. I mentioned in last week's session this line from Boris Cherny, who's the guy who is the creator of Claude Code. He did most of the coding. In that, he talks about when they coded up Claude Code, they made it the thinnest possible wrapper. Remember, we had this distinction between the inner harness and the outer harness. Anthropic Claude Code is the inner harness. It's the most simple version that they could possibly do. Even our agent that we've done now is very few files. And the memory system is really just these 2 files, which write the memory to file. Only these 2 files. It's a very thin outer harness that we're building. It's very simplistic. Nonetheless, even though it's simplistic, it is very, very powerful in terms of what it actually achieves. And because it's simple, that means it doesn't become this black box that's so complicated, you really have no idea what's happening. And if it's very, very simple, if you can understand it, your agent can definitely understand it. I'm going to show you what this actually looks like for real. When a session end or a PreCompactFlush happens, you will find a folder on your computer called daily. Under that daily folder, in a subfolder with a particular year, and in a subfolder underneath that for the month, and there is a file which has a date, which is a particular date, and this is my actual vault, which runs the exact same version. These are all the sessions that were started on that particular date. I was researching some information about medical standards, so it's done that research for me, and this is the session that I ran. It's basically got the session summary. And as I say, my version has these learnings And the decisions, you won't have this section yet, but what you will do is you will have the section called prompts, and this is all of the prompts that I ran. And you will have a section called assistant responses. And this is all of the responses from my agent. And so it's got every single prompt that I put in, and it's got every single response that the agent gave back. And it's got every single one, every single session that I ran on that particular day. Every day, it's saving a file for every session with all of that detail. When I asked Bob, what did we work on last week? This is what this resolves. Because once it's got all of this information, if I ask it, what did you do last week, it's going to come to the relevant date folder. It's going to look in that date, and it's going to read all that into context window, and it's going to understand what it is that we were working on last week.
Kevin, does it become sort of expensive as you keep this much memory for the agent to go through all of this memory and try to find topic you've spoken about?
That's an excellent question, Maxim. That's a really, really good question. Okay, so there's a couple of things that I would point out. Number one, you notice that those files are written in Markdown. Efficient to be read by a computer, but also very efficient to be stored. Because it's a simple text file, it's actually one of the most lightweight ways of storing information. If I had the same file stored as a Word document, it would be enormous. That's point number one, Maxim. Because it's in Markdown, it's very efficient to store. It's very easy for my agent to be able to go back and read that. And so it's very efficient from a storage and readability from my agent perspective is number one. The second point is slightly more nuanced because, of course, do I want to go ask my agent to go load a year's worth of history into the context window? No, I don't. As you start getting more and more and more, you want to have more efficient mechanisms of storing this. And this is not for now. This is for a later session. Do you recall from session 1, something which I called RAG, R-A-G, Retrieval Augmented Generation? So what that does is you take all of these Markdown files and you run it through a process. And that process chunks it up into small chunks. And each one of those chunks gets sent to a large language model. The large language model takes that information and it runs that through what's called an embedding model. And what that embedding model does is it takes all of that text and it puts it into that numerical representation. You'll remember that as part of that process, the word king and the word queen are very closely related to one another. It's that semantic meaning, and all that text gets embedded into that semantic meaning so that if you're looking for particular text, similar text comes up when you ask something in a particular way. And so what happens is if you have all of that data stored in these embeddings, what happens then is you ask a question. Your question will then be put into an embedding model. And then what happens is your process will then go into all of these embeddings of all of your history files, and it looks for similar matches. And it says, which are the ones that match very closely to the embeddings of your question? And then it will only pull out that information which has got similar semantic meaning to your question, because the likely answer to your question is going to have similar semantic meaning. So it will only pull out the relevant portions of your memory, which will have a very high likelihood of matching your question. And that is then the most efficient way of making sure you don't fill up your entire context window.
Does it mean that there is kind of a database somewhere of all of the sessions?
There is exactly a database, and it's called a vector database. It's a very special type of database which stores all of these embeddings. It's all chunked up, and so it'll only pull out the chunks where the embeddings match your question. Now, the second piece that I talked about is this MEMORY.md file. This is a slightly different form of memory. Your daily session file that we just talked about, that's very detailed session information, and you don't necessarily want to load all of that up into context every single time. You only want to load that up when you have a specific question. But there's certain things that you really want your agent to understand every single time. The things that call it load bearing, because you really need to make sure your agent understands it every time. If I've got a particular preference for a system that I use, I always use Slack, or I always want you to look for my to-do list in Google Keep. And I want my agent to know that every single time. There's only a small amount of information to store that, but you need to make sure that your agent knows that every single time. This is the sort of thing that you want stored in a MEMORY.md file. It needs to be concise. I don't want this to be very, very bloated. The reason being, it gets loaded into memory every single time in the exact same way as our user.md, our soul.md, our claude.md file, and our goals.md. So remember everything that's in our identity folder. What we're going to do today is we're going to create a memory.md file, and we're going to put it into your identity folder. And the moment you put it into your identity folder, we have a hook which we had from our original agent. It was the SessionStart hook. It reads everything in the identity folder and it loads it into the context window every time you start a Claude session in your agent folder. If I put that memory.md file into that folder, it will get loaded into the context every single time. And so this is like a new addition that we're adding into our user.md, our soul.md, our claude.md. It's another one of those files, but it's with the persistent things that we wanted to remember every time in terms of how we work. Anything that you think is like a long-term thing, you want your agent to remember every single time. So this is the second form of memory. So the first form was the daily sessions, and the second form is this kind of long-term persistent thing that you want to be loaded into your agent every single time. Once we've got that, we have a fully working memory system. It's really quite simple conceptually. Yes, there's some code, but the conceptual idea is very, very simple. The next thing that I want to move on to is the master prompt. The master prompt is, think of it as it's a way of evolving as we work. I don't want your agent to be frozen at the point in time that you created it. Recall the guy Tiago Forte. He's the guy that came up with this idea of a master prompt, and I've kind of copied one of his patterns here. The idea is we should run a command every 2 to 4 weeks at least, where your agent reviews any recent sessions that we've had, and it proposes updates to your soul, your user, your goals, your memory, and your Claude files. Once you approve those, it will then make those updates. That way, your agent is actually being updated from all of the things that we're learning as we're using it. And that's really important, because I don't want your agent to be stuck and not be updated the whole time, because all of this stuff is changing all the time. And as you're using your agent, it should be updating itself and making sure that it gets updated with all of that information. This master prompt it's not an automated process. It's being run by something called a slash command. And a slash command is a type of command that Claude Code knows and understands. And there are standard slash commands that Claude creates itself. So recall earlier on in the session when I did /remote-control to move a session into the cloud, which we could pick up on our phones. That was a slash command. That was one built by Claude. But what we're doing today is we're going to build our own custom slash command called /master-prompt. So when you go onto your Claude Code session and you type in /master-prompt, that custom command that we're going to generate will come up and it will run this learning loop. And this learning loop is basically going over all of the history and learning from that history. So I'm going to come now on to the merge. I mentioned the merge is going to get this capability and it's going to give it to your agent. The way we're going to do it is we're going to go get it from the AI Starter Vault. We were on a version called main, and this is the files that we cloned onto your computer, and the clone went to my GitHub repository, this one on GitHub. It pulled those files and it put them onto your computer, and that gave your agent its first set of capabilities with that one session hook, which was the one which was loaded up all your identity files. There is a second branch to this GitHub repository called phase 2. This branch called phase 2 has all of the capabilities that we've just spoken about today. It has the session hooks to be able to give the memory, and it has the memory.md memory.md file template, and it has the master prompt learning loop command. Instead of cloning this repo, what we're going to do is we're going to merge the information from this repo into my agent. And the reason why I'm not cloning this is because if you looked at last week's session 4B, I asked people to create a brand new GitHub repository on their GitHub account. And I asked you to take your agent with all of the markdown files on your agent, and I asked you to push that to that GitHub repository. So once you've done that, once you've pushed that to the GitHub repository, you are on a different version than the original AI starter kit version, because you already started using your agent. You've added new things. You've started creating new files. So it's kind of got off on a different fork, and we've left this version behind. This is my version. This is the one you got started with, but you now have a new version on your computer. I ask you to push that version to your own GitHub repository. And then as you start updating and doing commits locally on your computer, and you push those commits to GitHub, you now have a version which is completely different. This AI starter kit in phase 2 has all of the files we need, but I don't want you to clone this because this is a different version. So that's why we're going to use this merge command instead. And I'm going to go to my Bob agent. This is a Bob agent that's in a very similar state to what yours should be. I've got my own Bob vault on my GitHub repo. If I come into my Bob repo, so that's my version of the repo on GitHub. You can see my areas. You might recall health, house, job, and my projects. I think I had a marathon one, Copenhagen Marathon. There it is. So I've moved on from the starter vault as well. I've moved on to a different version. Now, if I come back to the starter vault, and I'm on the AI starter vault, phase 2, coming back to Bob, and I'm going to give it this prompt and set it off. And this prompt says add GitHub as an upstream remote, fetch the phase 2 branch, merge the phase 2 additions. Don't worry about the detailed prompt. I'm asking it to do is I'm asking it to go to that starter vault, and I'm going to ask it to pick up all of the new capabilities. And I'm going to ask it to merge those new capabilities into our current version that we have. It's going to run for just a couple of minutes. So while we're doing that, I'm actually going to pick up on some other things that I think people should be aware about. I've opened a new session of Claude, a couple of commands which I want people to learn because they're really useful commands to know. The first command I would like you to learn is /rename. I want you to learn this because it's just a really useful way of, when you go back to a session, it's useful to understand it by name. /rename Bob to do. Okay, did you notice there that it's now called this session Bob to do? And I could also, another command which is useful is color, and I can make this red. So it's now given this a red color. And this is useful because I might have 10 different Claude Code sessions open at any one point in time. So it's useful to give them a nice name, give them a color, and then it's very easy for me to just quickly go back and see which session am I working on at any point in time. And I can quickly go and grab that session and carry on with work, because I might give Bob to do a few different tasks, and it might run off for 10 or 15 minutes doing those tasks, and I'll then move that session away and I can move on to a different session, and I give that one a task. And so I've got all these sessions. It's nice to give them a different color and give them a name. And it's also useful because when I exit, now can you see there the resume command? I can just resume it with Bob to do, /resume Bob to do, Claude resume Bob to do, and there it is. It's resumed with a Bob to do, enter, and I'm back in Bob to do. Otherwise, the resume gives you this very long set of digits, which you don't want to have to be typing all these digits. You just give it a nice friendly name, and you can go back into that session, start it again, got the color coding that we gave it. So I'm going to come back to this session here, done what's happened versus what I asked. So one thing that's important to remember is that, see, it's recognized the PreCompactFlush and the SessionEndSummary. These are our new 2 hooks that we added. These won't be available until I restart Claude. So if I go exit, start Claude again, ask Claude, please confirm the session hook, checking that those files are now registered, confirmed. MEMORY.md loaded alongside identity files. So that's exactly what we expected. So you'll remember we talked about MEMORY.md That's the one we want loaded every single time. The sessions, they've now got 3 hooks, our SessionStart hook, which is the one we had from our original agent, and our 2 new ones that we've just added, the PreCompact one and the SessionEnd one. That looks good. Once you've done that merge, what that's done is pull down those session hooks, and it's now would create that new folder in your vault, which has the date and all of the session history. And now you can start asking about that session history, and it will remember everything that you've been working on over multiple sessions. Those are the key things that I wanted to cover today. Let me just switch back to the wrap up and homework. There are a few items that I want people to do for homework, and I will send out an email about this, so don't worry about remembering it now. But in priority order, so I want you to create your own private GitHub repo, and I want you to push your agent to it if you haven't already. Like, once you created your private GitHub repo, I want you to merge the phase 2 branch onto your own repo like we've just done now. So the prompt will be available in the email, so don't worry about that. Then once you've done that, I want you to restart your Claude session. I want you to verify that those session hooks are loaded and that it's got the MEMORY.md file loading from your identity file. So that way you know that both forms of memory are then working. And then I want you to run the master prompt command once you've done that. So this is the one where it learns from, and there it is now. So I'm conscious we didn't run it. You can see that now comes up because I've merged that into the repository. So it now comes up in my Claude session, and I'll run that. And it's now learning from our prior sessions. The self-improvement workflow, let me start by reading the current state and recent sessions. That's now learning. So I want you to, once you've done that merge and you've verified that the hooks are working, I want you to then run this master prompt command, and I want you to make sure that your learning loop is now in action. Once you've done that, the 5th item is I want you to just use your agent, okay? And just use it every day this week. Make sure that you are using that memory. Make sure that you are using that master prompt command to update your files, and the more you use it, the more it's going to compound, as you already know. There's one more thing. Skills. If you haven't already, I want you to make sure that you've tried to set up one of your own skills using the create skill. The last item is the gaps log. So I want you to keep a log of all the gaps. I'm conscious that people are encountering hiccups. Keep a log of those and either email me or give it to me in advance of next week, and we can start next week's session with that. Phase 2 is now done. Your agent now remembers what's happened. It has a curated layer for you to maintain and a self-improvement loop that keeps your master prompt fresh. From this moment on, your agent gets better at being you every single week. Whenever you use it, that's why I want you to use as much as possible. My agent has now finished his master prompt and updated the relevant files. So there. So thank you very much, everybody, for attending today's session. That's all we've got for today.